The political atmosphere in Britain has turned electric as Sir Keir Starmer's government finds itself embroiled in controversy, both at home and abroad. At the centre of the storm is Starmer's bold decision to support the International Criminal Court's (ICC) arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The move, heralded by some as a victory for international justice, has enraged Tory MPs and sparked an international uproar, throwing Britain into the middle of a global diplomatic crisis. On home soil, Labour faces its own set of scandals, from a farmer-led revolt over inheritance tax changes to fierce criticism of their law and order crackdown. Starmer's government may have underestimated just how explosive these battles would become. It all began with the ICC's bombshell announcement. Arrest warrants were issued against Netanyahu, former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Hamas military commander Mohammed Deif. The charges against Netanyahu and Gallant are severe, including using starvation as a method of warfare, persecution, and murder. Hamas's Deif faces crimes against humanity, though reports of his death in a July airstrike have cast uncertainty over his prosecution. The inclusion of Netanyahu, however, sent shockwaves through the diplomatic world, as a sitting head of state now faces potential arrest by ICC member states, including Britain. The legal ramifications for Britain are unprecedented. As a signatory to the ICC, the UK is obligated to enforce these warrants, yet the idea of arresting a sitting world leader has sparked heated debate. When asked if Britain would detain Netanyahu should he visit the UK, the Prime Minister's spokesperson offered a vague response, stating that the government respects the ICC's independence. This non-committal stance has infuriated critics and left the public speculating whether Starmer's government would truly go as far as to detain one of the most polarising figures in global politics. Starmer's decision to align with the ICC represents a dramatic policy shift from his conservative predecessors. Shortly after taking office in July, Labour scrapped Tory-led efforts to oppose certain ICC rulings, signalling their intention to fully embrace international law. Attorney General Lord Hermer KC has staunchly defended the move, emphasising the importance of upholding global justice, even when politically inconvenient. Foreign Secretary David Lammy echoed this position, calling the ICC a cornerstone of accountability in a chaotic world. Yet this stance has enraged Tory MPs and their allies, with critics branding the ICC as a kangaroo court bent on politicising international conflicts. Robert Jenrick, Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary, led the charge against the decision, accusing the court of creating a false equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Priti Patel, another vocal Tory, warned that Labour's alignment with the ICC does nothing to bring peace to Gaza and risks undermining global stability. Starmer's move has also strained Britain's relationship with key allies. The United States, one of Israel's staunchest supporters, has fiercely opposed the ICC's actions. President Joe Biden denounced the arrest warrants as outrageous, insisting that there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. The message from Washington is clear. The US views the ICC's decision as not just politically dangerous, but fundamentally unjust. Starmer's defiance of American opinion could have far-reaching consequences, potentially jeopardizing the special relationship between Britain and the US. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's office dismissed the charges against him as absurd and politically motivated, while other nations have begun taking sides. Italy and the Netherlands have pledged to enforce the warrants, while Canada has offered strong support for the ICC. For now, the UK stands at a crossroads, caught between its legal obligations and the potential diplomatic fallout. As the Netanyahu scandal dominates headlines, Starmer's government faces a second firestorm at home. Labour's proposed inheritance tax reforms, set to take effect in 2026, have sparked outrage among British farmers, who argue that the changes could devastate rural communities. Thousands of farmers marched in protest this week, accusing Labour of ignoring their needs and branding the policy as the final insult in a long history of neglect. Anne Widdecombe, a prominent former Conservative MP, slammed the reforms as arrogant and warned that they represent the straw that will break the camel's back. Farmers have long endured economic hardship, compounded by what they describe as a lack of meaningful government support. The Bishop of St Albans, Right Reverend Reverend Alan Smith has highlighted the severe mental health crisis in the agricultural sector, noting that suicide rates among farmers remain alarmingly high. In a particularly grim anecdote, the bishop shared the story of an elderly farmer who believes she is worth more dead than alive due to the financial strain the tax reforms would impose. Widdecombe echoed this sentiment, calling Labour's refusal to engage with the National Farmers' Union shameful and accusing Chancellor Rachel Reeves of arrogance for declining to meet with farming representatives. Labour's insistence on pushing forward with the reforms has left many rural voters feeling abandoned, further fueling anger against the government. Adding to Labour's woes is their controversial crackdown on antisocial behaviour, which has drawn both praise and scorn. The new respect orders, announced this week, promise tough penalties for those guilty of harassment, vandalism, or public drinking. Offenders could face up to 2 years in prison, unlimited fines, and even mandatory rehabilitation programs. Police would also gain sweeping powers to confiscate vehicles and ban offenders from public spaces. The measures are part of Labour's broader effort to restore law and order in communities plagued by crime and disorder. But the timing of the crackdown has raised eyebrows, given Labour's recent decision to release thousands of non-violent offenders to ease prison overcrowding. Critics argue the party's approach is contradictory and heavy-handed, more focused on optics than meaningful reform. The public response to these scandals has been deeply divided. Supporters of Labour's ICC stance view it as a principled stand for justice, while opponents fear it undermines Britain's diplomatic credibility and risks escalating tensions in the Middle East. On the domestic front, the inheritance tax reforms have galvanised rural communities, sparking protests and resentment that could alienate a critical voter base. Meanwhile, the respect orders have received mixed reactions, with some praising the tough stance on crime, while others decry the measures as overly punitive. For Starmer, these controversies mark a defining moment in his leadership. His willingness to take bold, controversial positions has earned him both admiration and animosity, painting him as a leader unafraid to challenge the status quo. Yet the risks are immense. By backing the ICC, Starmer has placed Britain at the centre of an international firestorm, risking diplomatic fallout that could damage relationships with key allies. Domestically, his policies have ignited a wave of anger among farmers and civil liberties groups, leaving Labour vulnerable to accusations of being out of touch with ordinary voters. The coming weeks will be critical for Starmer's government. Will his gamble on international justice and bold domestic reforms pay off, solidifying his reputation as a transformative leader? Or will the backlash prove too much, leaving Labour struggling to recover from the growing discontent? One thing is certain. The political storm shows no sign of subsiding, and the consequences of Starmer's decisions will reverberate for years to come. Britain, it seems, is bracing for a turbulent future.